A Christmas video? Everyone knows in the United States, Christmas is not truly over until January 1st anyways. The week between December 25th and January 1st barely exists. When does Christmas start then? Well, beside the old complaint, earlier and earlier every year, Christmas has always started the Saturday after Thanksgiving. No, not Black Friday. Says who? Says the Clinchfield Railroad, now CSX Transportation, of the Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia region. Never heard of them? Well, as one of the premier Christmas locomotive attractions, they have the prestige to say so. The Santa Train is Appalachia's own Polar Express that has been a Christmas tradition since 1943. Yes, more than 80 years. The Santa Train, technically considered a Christmas parade, one of the longest, because occasionally the Kingsport Christmas Parade is included at the end, in some calculations, serves gifts and candy to children in the United States' old coal mine country. Christmas and trains have always gone together as a holly jolly tradition, even before the Polar Express. Throughout its existence, the Santa Train has gone from a regional curiosity to national fame, then back to a small, dedicated tradition of coal country. As said, it is considered one of the longest Christmas parades in the United States and the world. It runs a variable 110 miles over about 9 hours depending on the year's itinerary. The towns it moves through are deep American towns with names like Frisco, Kermit, and Harwood, located deep in East Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, and East Kentucky. Once considered the treacherous mountain spine of the United States until the late 1800s, the Santa Train travels across the United States' old coal mine country. These rails were a modern wonder of America's rail system when the Clinchfield Railroad finally organized them more than a century ago. The Santa Train, for example, passes through about 30 tunnels along the 110-mile route. Even Santa has to get around the uneven terrain, hard turns, and steep switchbacks of these mountains somehow. He does it on the renowned Santa Express. Outsiders, though, sometimes wonder about how this tradition exactly started. The Santa Train, though, started as a simple thank you celebration by the Kingsport Merchants Association, today the Chamber of Commerce. Yes, this tradition is so old the economic unit behind it used to be called the Merchants Association when it started, to the region in 1943, until the Santa Train became more of a dedicated event in 1968, though it continued to run between 1943 and 1968. And the Santa Train is an event. It has and needs logistics to serve around 14 towns and smaller stops along the line. There's hundreds who volunteer their time for it, and that's not even counting railroad staff and station volunteers who help the whole process run. Like most of the United States rail system, the old Clinchfield line is today largely a cargo line, so exceptions have to be made when the Santa Train, aka the Santa Express, moves down the line for celebrations. The treats distributed have evolved over 40 years, from sugar sweets and notepads, to dolls and candy, to today distributing entire color-coded gift bags and tossing soft toys from the train to the waiting crowd. Santa presides over both the Santa Train, then the Kingsport Christmas Parade, which caps off the event. Beyond even the candy, it is one of the sweetest Christmas events in the United States. The Santa Train is a major tradition to locals, train fans, and Christmas fanatics. There are plenty of people who are all three. After all, there are families who have been participating in the Santa Train event for 3 or 4 generations by now. The excursion has been a fixture in the region for more than 80 years. In the United States, that's an impressive length of time. The Clinchfield Railroad, or the Clinchfield Quick Service Route, once served as the main valve for the coal economy of Appalachia. The railroad was literally cut, dug, and usually blasted through the hard rock mountains of the area. It took decades and many failed attempts. It was and is a rough mountainous region of the United States. Notoriously still is. The Clinchfield route, now operated by CSX Transportation after multiple complex mergers and buyouts since 1986, is particularly known for its bridges and treacherous turns. The people along the route are largely ancestral coal miners, mountaineers, and those involved in the region's extraction economy based on the mountains and what rests below the mountains. The song, You'll Never Leave Harlan Alive, was written about the culture. It's pretty good, and is about the nearby area of Kentucky. Check it out. It is one gritty and hardworking region, so the trains that served it were as well. It is a tough life there that deindustrialization has made even harder. There's a reason this quick service route's tagline was once, "Through the Appalachians, not around them." Even today, the region is remote and particularly impoverished due to the recent decline of the coal economy in the last few decades, especially the towns along the Kentucky-Virginia border. For reference, Trammell, Virginia, organized in 1913, and where the last spike of the Clinchfield Railroad was driven, was technically one of the last company towns in the United States until it was broken up in 1986 due to the owner's death. Though workers were not paid in company scrip, nearly all the houses there were rented until the formation of the Trammell Homeowners Association, which raised the necessary funds to purchase them from the Big Banner Coal Corporation. This was less than 40 years ago, too. The miners along the old Clinchfield line have historically felt forgotten. Strikes were very common even to the 1990s. The Clinchfield Moss Mine in Wise County, Virginia, for example, was one of the epicenters of the Pittston coal strike in 1989-1990. Labor unrest is synonymous with the region. Poverty, unfortunately, is as well. Both have been historical constants for coal country in the USA. Where there is coal, though, there are trains. Trains to carry the cargo and the miners. Local businesses and politicians were highly aware and exposed to this labor unrest during the 1940s, when rationing due to World War II hit the region hard. In those days, even basics like sugar and shoes were hard to come by in coal country. The main area of concern for local business owners was the line between Kingsport, Tennessee and Elkhorn City, Kentucky, rounding back through Pikeville, Virginia. Local politicians like Kingsport Mayor J.B. Blankenbeckler and business owners like local grocer Raymond Gayland decided to show appreciation to those who lived in North Tennessee and Southwest Virginia through a special act. The idea of a Christmas train, though, was thought up by hardware store owner Flem Dobbins and Kingsport Times news writer Bill Waddell. Waddell advertised it in the local news as a Santa Claus special to provide Christmas relief to the region's coalfield towns. As to not condescend to the industrious hard workers of the region, the term charity was particularly avoided when talking about the Santa train or Santa Express in the early years. It was not a charity, it was a Christmas celebration. This Christmas celebration was usually billed as a goodwill event to provide relief to the region. The original Santa train was not even a dedicated parade. No, actually the first few trains simply used the back car of a scheduled passenger train, throwing little trinkets and candy from the caboose. Joe Higgins, the first local to play Santa from 1943 to 1950, and the rest of the first Santa Train team simply hopped into a caboose on November 27, 1943, then started tossing candy, notepads, and other small trinkets off the back platform of the caboose to the assembled crowds. This was before the Santa Train started handing out toys, exactly. Despite the discontinuation of regularly scheduled passenger trains along the Clinchfield line in the 1950s, the Santa train has basically never stopped since that first celebration in 1943, beside for a few extreme exceptions such as coronavirus. It runs up and down the same line essentially every year. It is a particularly treasured event in the tri-state region. The role of Santa Claus, as of 2024, in the parade, for example, has only swapped hands 4 times since 1943. In 1968, the Santa train turned into a true local event when a local steam locomotive was restored and used for the event. That locomotive had been used prior on the Clinchfield line to haul coal. In 1973, it was estimated that steam locomotive employed used between 10 to 12 tons of coal on the trip. Coal is used as a fuel, not a present on the Santa train. The 1970s did see national fame on the Santa train as railroad enthusiasts began to trek out to see the event, and special featured steam locomotives such as Challenger in 1992. There was more attention in 1982 when the Santa train was covered on CBS News' nationwide On the Road special on November 20th. Beside a few alterations over the decades, the overall format and sentiment of the Santa train has actually changed very little since 1943. The organization, requiring more than 30 volunteers, has simply become more efficient as the Santa train now carries 15 to 20 tons of toys to deliver, a long way from sugar sweets and notepads. Today, the Santa train departs usually from Shelby Yard in Pikesville, Kentucky at 6:10 or 6:30 a.m. Why the delay? Even at 6 a.m., there's already a crowd of parents, children, and onlookers gathered to participate in sightsee outside of Shelby Yard, or whatever yard the train will be coming from that year. In recent years, while children receive color-coded bags of gifts, even parents receive gifts in the form of wrapping paper. The Santa train generally does 14 to 20-something stops, depending on the year, though usually it is around 14, over 9 hours through give or take 29 towns, depending on definition of a town, each stop taking around 15 to 20 minutes. The schedule usually runs something like Daint, pronounced not like the Italian, but instead similar to paint, so Daint, is reached by 10:30 a.m., St. Paul by 11 a.m., then Fort Blackmore by 1 p.m., and finally, Kingsport is reached around 3 p.m. for the commencement of the Christmas parade. It's a local tradition that the Santa train Santa Claus takes special place in that. Interesting historical note here, the Santa train never actually stopped prior to the year 2000. as in stopped moving. For the first 57 years, the Santa train simply slow-rolled down the tracks. Santa and volunteers would toss candy, pretzels, notepads, dolls, and toys whenever they came across a crowd. Santa always sure to greet the crowd and gleeful children. The train only started stopping at stations and markers in 2000 to distribute bags of gifts and loose candy. Today, a lot of the gifts are donations from businesses across the United States and celebrities. It was due to both safety concerns and logistics the train actually started stopping at towns and stations. Surprisingly, over more than 50 years, there was never a single report of even a minor injury, so it wasn't due to some controversy. The more pressing issue was it was proving difficult for volunteers to distribute so many gifts to such large crowds from a moving train. Thus, the stop and distribute on foot system was adopted, which the Santa train retains to this day, after 24 years. Once again, the Santa train is much more a goodwill event rather than an act of charity. There are plenty of people who come to view it simply due to tradition or the novelty of the train. There are senior citizens in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia who have seen the Santa train every year of their life. Still, it serves a good Christmas purpose. The region is one of the poorest in the United States, and issues like deindustrialization and the drug epidemic have not made life easier in the area. Crippling poverty is there any time of the year. There are plenty of children whose only Christmas gifts come from the Santa train. If anything, the Santa train is more of a direct act than a charity. There's no questions asked about who is receiving the gifts. Today, nobody knows how much it actually costs to run the Santa train every year. No one minds much either. The entire cargo line, mainly carrying coal, between Shelby to Kingsport is basically shut down to allow the Santa train passage up and down the line. It is accepted that any cost is acceptable in the pursuit of the excursion and Christmas purpose. It's about goodwill. It is very nice when a trust in people is rewarded for a good purpose. It seems old trains get people going. Steam locomotives get people going towards the Christmas spirit. It is the perfect mixture between new and old. Reminder, the Santa train started in World War II, and despite some concerns, it has survived to 2024 and will beyond. Local businesses are still involved, such as supporting and sponsoring the essay contest/scholarship the Santa train holds for students' best memories related to the Santa Train Scholarship Fund. The CSX Transportation continues to support and expand the tradition as well. Santa Train, sometimes still branded the Santa Express, alongside CSX's own Christmas Express, are usually decked out in Christmas livery. The Santa Train in 2024, for example, was also expanded to support the areas devastated by Hurricane Helene, such as Unicoi County in Tennessee. The Santa Train is not some corporate obligation, but still a living tradition that perpetuates itself in the local culture. There's celebrity guests and things like that, of course, but there have also been songs by Patty Loveless and children's books written about the Santa Train. The people who talk about it usually have a personal, deep connection to it. Emotional, family links, things like that. I don't. I just thought it was a really neat story. Is that why the Santa train survives? People like Santa, and people like trains, kids especially. Trains have been synonymous with Christmas long before the Polar Express. There's also a bit of wonderful irony that a rail line known for historically transporting coal now transports gifts on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Santa is always there to greet and welcome the people from the train. People who like gifts come, people who like trains come, and the Christmas spirit comes along with it. There's that innocent magic there. As Emery B. Blinkenbeckler told the New York Times about the Santa Express in 1986, the people who come on these trips are good people who just want to do good things. Merry Christmas and goodwill to men. And trains.
And a ho, 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 thank you to my supporters. Violet on